Good morning. Welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome our Industry Council to our first Zoom meeting. And I know it's been a long time since we've had a chance to talk and to visit, and I hope that soon we'll be meeting in person. But for now, this is, of course, the venue that we're so accustomed to meeting in. I know it's been a tough time for everybody, but we're finally seeing the city of Chicago, and certainly the state of Illinois starting to open up. And I'm pleased to be able to say that the Chicago Architecture Center will be opening up on July 3rd, as will the Architecture River Cruises. So we are seeing advances, which is great. And our walking tours are already started with social distancing with all our docents. So it's a good time to be together. So we're pleased to welcome you to today's Industry Council events. And Ozinga is our presenting sponsor for all the 2020 events. I want to introduce Tim Ozinga, who's the co-owner and executive vice president for Ozinga Brothers, a fourth-generation family-owned company specializing in building materials and bulk logistics. Through his management of the customer development team, Tim is responsible for developing innovative solutions to help solve customers' needs and push the boundaries of material science and delivery in the AEC community. Tim oversees the marketing, sales, and research development functions at Ozinga, including their state-of-the-art AAS-HTO and CCRL certified material testing lab located at their headquarters in the Pilsen neighborhood. And we're also familiar with those red and white trucks going around town. So with this, I'd like to introduce Tim Ozinga.
Thank you, Lynn. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. Ozinga Brothers was founded by great-grandpa in 1928, and ever since then, what gets us up every day is the opportunity to have a positive impact on individuals, their families, and the community for generations. Our mission is to leave the world around us better every day. Today, I have the honor of introducing our two panelists, Mr. Joe Burns and Mr. Brad Henderson. First, I will introduce our moderator, Mr. Joe Burns, Managing Principal of Thornton Tomasetti. Mr. Burns has more than 40 years of experience designing structures as well as investigating and renovating existing buildings. Joe is a passionate advocate for deeper integration of architecture and engineering, which he promotes through technical innovation in the design of structural systems, collaboration in practice, and leadership in building science education. His contributions to the AEC industry have been recognized with his advancement to Fellow of the AIA ASCR Institute of Structural Engineers and IABSE. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Mr. Brad Henderson, founding CEO of P33. Mr. Henderson leads the nonprofit organization to drive global technology leadership for Chicago and promote inclusive economic growth for all. Brad has over 20 years of professional experience and brings a deep understanding of how to unlock economic opportunities that benefit both business and individuals. Brad is also an active leader in the community, where he serves on the boards of the Chicago History Museum, the Association House in Humboldt Park, and the Interfaith Youth Corps. He also serves on the boards of Axion US Network and Impact Engine. Without further ado, I present to you today's Industry Council Leadership event, P33 Initiatives and Technology Solutions, presented by the Chicago Architecture Center.
Okay. Brad, welcome, and thank you, Tim. Thank you, Lynn, for that those introductions, and let's get going. So I think first off, Brad, tell us a little bit about P33. Where did it come from?
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Lynn. I'm such a fan of the Architecture Foundation and all the work that you do, so it's an honor to share with and talk with you today. So very briefly, P33, and if we could put the slides up, please, that'd be very helpful. So P33, what are we all about, and how do we hope to work with you all to make Chicago an even better place? And you'll note on the slide that FoslerCon is actually one of our real sources of inspiration in our work. We really believe that Chicago, when we sort of bridge silos across our universities, our investors, our entrepreneurs, our big companies, et cetera, we can do just absolutely incredible things. And FoslerCon was definitely an inspiration in that regard. So P33 really exists to help us overcome a conundrum facing our city and our region. Chicago, the research we've done says, has world-class innovation assets. To give you an example, we have the third best science by measure of publication in the country. Yet for the past 20 years, we've been losing share of the innovation economy every single year. We have world-class assets, but average outcomes. Those outcomes are even more troubling when you get into issues of race and gender. A very simple fact, 66% of our population in Chicago are people of color, and they only represent 12% of the tech sector. So when Secretary Penny Pritzker came back from Washington, D.C., having traveled around the world about 3 years ago or so, she looked around and said, well, why is this? And how do I assemble a group of folks to come help solve this challenge? She was able to assemble 400 leaders from across the city, CEOs of major companies, not-for-profit leaders, community leaders, university presidents, et cetera. I was part of that steering committee. I worked for 20 years at the Boston Consulting Group. And we went on a journey to understand what it was we needed to do as a city to really move forward. So if you could move to the next page, that'd be helpful. This just gives you a sense of the breadth of participation that went into that. It was essentially 2 years worth of research to really make sure we understood what our strengths were, what the gaps were, and start to formulate solutions to turn this beautiful, amazing, incredible city into the inclusive innovation juggernaut we all believe it can become. And so if you just turn to the next page. What was really profound was just to dig into the specific trends and understand what it was on nearly every dimension, whether it was talent or research or innovation or entrepreneurship. What was it about Chicago that was, essentially making it so that our engine doesn't operate quite as effectively and efficiently as we can? And in July of 2019, so about this time last year, I left my job of 20 years. We've built a team of about 15 folks, and we wake up every day, try to take the findings of this incredible research and bring it into action so that we can bolster Chicago. I do want to make one quick comment. So you might say, well, P33, I've heard P33, the name. My wife likes to joke that it's a short version of the exercise program P90X. That's not the case. P33 actually is a specific reference to the World's Fair in 1933 and the founding of Chicago 100 years before that. And really the premise behind our work, the P stands for project and people. And 33 is by 2033, we want to ensure our project with the people of Chicago really returns. If we were here in 1933, we were in the Silicon Valley of the United States. We aren't that now. And we want to make sure by 2033 we are again. There's an important piece of that, which is 1933, when we were very successful, it only included white people and white men predominantly. And we have to change that. And so our goal is to make sure all of us get to a celebration in 2033. If you go to the next page, I'll just highlight a couple last quick comments. Actually, go to the next one, just in the spirit of time. Thank you. So if you had to boil about 700 megabytes of research down to a couple of things, there are specific problems in Chicago we're trying to solve. I'm going to rattle them off very quickly, and then Joe will go into it in more detail in our conversation. The first one is having the third best science in the country, and yet we're not in the top 10 in commercializing science. Tesla does its battery research at Argonne National Labs and employs 4 people, and then thousands of people in Nevada and California. And that story is replicated again and again and again. And that's a problem we are working hard to solve. In the entrepreneurship world, we have great news. 1871 and some other organizations have built a robust early stage startup ecosystem here in Chicago over the past 8 or 9 years. But our startups tend to get stuck at 50 employees, the data says. And they tend to build businesses that aren't very complicated from a technology perspective. And we have very few African-American and Latino founders. And so we need to change that. So those are problems we're working on. The next thing I'll mention is Chicago, already hiding in plain sight, is the advanced analytics capital of the United States, and we're doing nothing with it. We have the second most data scientists. We have 20 companies with a more than $1 billion business case in front of their boards around data science. We have the 600 data science startups, and yet we're really not taking advantage that analytics, and we'll talk about this later, is infusing everything we do, but we haven't figured out a plan to really be great at it. And last one, and perhaps most importantly, Chicago's blessed. We have one of the biggest bases of college graduates in the country, and we have ample, aside from our current very profound crisis, in general, we have ample open positions. And yet our workforce infrastructure is the worst designed big city workforce infrastructure in the country, which means we lose lots of people. And particularly if you're someone of color or a woman, the process is not set up well to support you from, let's say, a high school education in Lawndale to a job at Google. Our research says we're one of the most challenged places in the country to support that workforce development process. So the initiatives below I won't go into, but we'll probably pull some of that in the conversation. What really excites me is that we have assets and ways to win. What we're very excited about is how do we all come together as a community? How do we bridge the silos between architecture and construction and research and big companies and startups, et cetera, to actually solve problems better than our peer cities and make our city a more vibrant place.
Thanks for that introduction, Brad. And you know, and also, you know, our conversation is going to be about not only what you are doing with P33, but perhaps how it can intersect and overlap with our Chicago's architecture, engineering, and construction community, the AEC industry, because we have the same interest in continuing our leadership in innovation in that field, and I think there's a lot of overlap, as I think we'll discover. I loved your reference to Fazler Khan. He's one of my heroes. Many heroes in the architecture and engineering community. A great innovator and collaborator. So one of the first off, just in terms of one big intersect between our community and yours, is the new DPI in the midst of Related 78, that the Discovery Partners Institute. And it's very hot in our community right now because they have a big RFP out on the street looking for choosing a design team to build that new facility. Tell us a little bit about how you at P33 have supported that over the years, and what in addition to the architectural significance of it, what it's going to do for Chicago.
Great. Yeah, DPI, in our view, is a once in 100-year opportunity for Chicago. And we've been very strong advocates for it for over 2 years because the data says we need it. Why does the data say we need it? The stats on University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign are incredible. I'm blown away every time I go there and learn what's happening. It's the fourth best computer science school in the country. They have more computer science graduates than the other 4 top 5 schools combined. The largest engineering school in the country. And if you think about virtually any realm of engineering, science, innovation, they're in the top 5 of the league table. And yet this distance between Urbana and Chicago means that relative to some other peer cities like Boston or San Francisco or LA with equal prowess, a lot of that talent and innovation dissipates. The out-migration of U of I graduates is sobering. What DPI offers is an ability to create one central hub campus. We're located in the heart of Chicago. They've intentionally built partnerships with UChicago, Northwestern, UIC, IIT. They're working with some of the best universities around the world. And so it's if you've heard of Cornell Tech or you think about Kendall Square, this is our moment. This is our opportunity to really do something that is globally preeminent. And so for us, it has to happen. I think the part I'm incredibly excited about is we can combine it with our architectural and engineering prowess and build something very special And so the idea of bringing great architecture and a great institution right to the heart of downtown Chicago, I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Well, that's great. And again, that's a great intersect. I think the other thing that's impacting us all right now, and I'd love to hear how it's impacting P33 and the mission, the DPI mission you just gave us, talked about, is COVID-19. It's obviously changed the way we work in our field, and everywhere else. But how has this impacted, what you started doing 2 years ago?
Yeah, great question. And needless to say, it's been a hard month, 3 or 4 months for all of us, right? And this is one of those moments where we have to rally together to help one another. We were in that lovely situation where on March 8th, we got approval from our board for a 5-year strategy. And by March 15th, everything changed. And so it was an interesting moment for P33. What's been fascinating for us is there are a couple of areas that really matter to us that in a very strange way, COVID has taken 2 or 3 years of hard work and turned it into 3 months of work because it forced collaboration in a way we hadn't seen before. Our fundamental premise is about getting our universities and our companies and our startups and our investors and our public sector working together. That's what we believe is the missing piece in Illinois. And COVID has forced that. So we had 2 things we were working on that just took off because of this. The first is the notion of applying data science to healthcare. We had convened on March 5th about 100 leaders from across Illinois to think about analytics in healthcare. We're looking at at-risk pregnancies as our use case. On March 15th, our use case became COVID. And if you were able to go behind the scenes in the governor's office and the mayor's office and hospitals, et cetera, what you see are P33 sponsored initiatives where every time you hear Governor Pritzker talk about his forecast for COVID and what it means for hospitalization rates, et cetera, that's actually a Chicago startup, P33, a bunch of academics and hospitals working together in a way they haven't before. Similarly, around talent, we were thinking about an upskilling initiative to support Chicago companies and unemployed people to get more digital skills. When COVID hit and 1 million people became unemployed in the course of 6 weeks in Illinois, we rallied in a way I never thought we could. We launched in about 8 weeks a program with DPI and every other university in our region called Tech Ready. And basically are able to deliver to people's family rooms or dining rooms world-class digital technology education that can get them back to work and into a job in a Chicago company. And those, I thought that would take 2 years. We have a lot of work to do, but what I'll say is COVID for Chicago has meant people working together a lot more than I would have thought.
That's great. Again, I think we're finding in our how collaborative our field is that we'd be able to carry that on with technology like this, that if we didn't have this technology, I don't know where we'd be. So staying a little bit on the architectural theme, and you've already brought it up twice now with Fazler Khan and the 1933 World's Fair, but I've noticed in your new website, p33chicago.com, which explains more about the origins and the initiative. You make great use of images of Chicago architecture as sort of part of your branding, and they're really beautiful pictures. And I wanted you to comment on that, explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so we are in love with Chicago architecture, and we think it's one of those areas where we've always shown essentially cross-silo collaboration, to use a pretty lousy business set of buzzwords. We think it's one of our best examples. So there are 2 things that really inspire us. The first is, if you think about someone like Fazler Khan and what he was able to do, it wasn't that he just was a good engineer or understood architecture. If you read his history, I mean, he kind of is he's our perfect, he's our hero. So, he's an immigrant. He is a multi-faith representation of diversity. He went to Urbana-Champaign. He taught at Illinois Institute, what is now in Illinois Institute of Technology. He was one of the early adopters of the use of computer science in architecture. He combined engineering and architecture in very unique ways. We need a lot more of that. We need people who cross boundaries. Chicago should be a city about crossing boundaries. And that at our core is we think one of Chicago's greatest strengths is actually its density. It's interlocking grid. We think if you just look at from above how Chicago works with its river and its trains, et cetera, we think our physical plant, our footprint, and our architecture actually really point to what we should be doing in our problem solving, which is reaching out and working with others and intersecting as much as possible. And we actually love the image of the tubular concept that Fazla Khan created. To us as almost like an engineering symbol of the kind of problem solving we want, which is to create an outside brace that's stronger than the individual pieces.
Oh, that's great. And I think now to talk a little bit about some of the, just to bring to our participants today some of the excitement that will be generated inside of things like the DPI, University of Chicago, and others. You've mentioned before that to me that one of the leading things about Chicago in the future is going to be quantum computing and molecular engineering, terms that are relatively new to me and our field, and I'm curious about what those things are and maybe some of the use cases that might affect our industry. Great.
Yeah, if you do not spend all of your time thinking about quantum computing and molecular engineering, that's okay. It is one of those technologies. We hear a lot about AI and machine learning, and that's a really important technology. This is a technology for 5 years from now that is showing very early promising signs, but I think will be relevant to all of us very soon. And we should recognize that one of the reasons it will matter so much is Chicago is probably the molecular engineering and quantum computing hub for the next 20 years. And we're fighting hard to ensure that happens. Why should you care? At its core, what molecular engineering is actually, instead of thinking about how molecules interact, it's going inside of the molecule and creating the ability to reprogram it. So imagine you had almost like a computer program that could take any atom, any molecule, any compound, and almost like a computer, rewrite the software and have it do interesting things. And so what that promises for Chicago, if you think about just quantum computing as an example, on a problem like materials design, and I know many of you all are very constrained by what materials do. And if you look at even the most powerful supercomputer that we have right now and try to ask it to solve really important questions around material science, we're very constrained in what we're able to do. Similarly, problems around grid optimization. So if you're worried about energy for a city or a state or a country, we actually have to use all kinds of heuristics that make our ability to optimize energy very inefficient, because even with our amazing supercomputers, they just can't do it right now. Similarly, if you think about the ability to detect things. So there are detection use cases in construction where the things that you want to be able to do to go deep inside materials and understand if there are any structural compromises that you can't do with the size of material that you can see. What quantum computing and molecular engineering allows for is you to overcome those things. Quantum computing can do a problem in 1 minute that takes the strongest supercomputer in the world right now 1,000 years to solve. Think about it. Wow. And if you think about just basic things like detection, imagine with quantum sensors, we'll be able to drop inside our bodies almost like little robots that we can program and rebuild cell mutation as soon as it happens. You can think about similar applications in the building and architecture space. It really could unlock the next wave of growth if we get this right. And it's happening here. We've had over $200 million of federal funding come in for this technology. If you hadn't heard, the University of Chicago launched last year something called the Pritzker School for Molecular Engineering with a $100 million gift from the Pritzker family. It's the first new school at the University of Chicago in over 30 years. And over the course of the summer, we should be getting lots of good news from the federal government, which doesn't happen very often these days, around our place as a quantum computing center. This is a big deal for us. I'd love to find a way for us all to rally around this.
Well, that's great. And we'll be looking forward to seeing spin-offs over the next decade that could affect our industry. The technology that is right in front of us now, because we're all hearing about 5G, is the increase in ability to communicate, to connect things together, either through IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things, or connecting, as you said, a lot of the sensors. That's being rolled out right now. It's something that, again, we get a new G every decade starting in the 1980s. And not only what does 5G do for Chicago, the AEC industry, and obviously by the time we get to 2033, we'll probably be up to 6Gs. But what does all this mean for DPI, P33, and the future of Chicago?
Yeah, for us, if you go back, if you think about one of the slides I shared, I talked a lot about advanced analytics and how important that is to Chicago. And advanced analytics for a city like Chicago and our innovation is going to be very tied to 5G in the industrial internet. This is a big vector of growth for us. And it's that way for a couple of reasons. So if you think about, and at BCG, I used to lead BCG's operations practice. So the idea of connecting buildings and manufacturing and supply chain and transportation used to be done on Excel. You pick up the phone and you'd call somebody and say, we're out of it, or it's coming. You'd use your calculator to do inventory management. In most factories around the country, we're not much better than that. A lot of our biggest physical plant factories are actually located in rural areas. And you walk into them and many of them still look like a factory would look like in the 1980s. What 5G and Internet of Things allows for, as the price of sensors have gone way down, is the second you can start tagging every device and get that information very quickly to algorithms that allow you to solve problems, you can manage your business entirely differently. You can solve inventory problems very differently. You can solve process problems very differently. You can just reimagine how you make stuff. For Chicago, that is an incredible benefit. It's an incredible benefit because it actually starts to mean that manufacturing requires deep analytical skills. I'm from a small town in Ohio. We have many assets. We have many factories, actually. It is not a town full of deep analytical skills, which means that you're going to see more, and you're seeing this with Amazon in Chicago. We're getting an outsized, over-indexed amount of distribution capacity relative to our size, because our central location, our analytical talent, et cetera, starts to mean you're going to see manufacturing and supply chain assets come back into cities. E-commerce further accelerates that. And then the last thing I'll say is all the startups we have around and academics we have around thinking about these things, start taking a walk or an Uber ride to a factory to solve a problem. One of the most innovative factories in the country is in the West Loop of Chicago. It's called Fast Radius. And what they can do is they can pick up the phone from Ford Motor Company. Ford can say, this part isn't working. Can you print 10,000 of a new part for me by the end of the week? And Fast Radius can say, we'll print it in the West Loop and we'll have it in your factories by the end of the week.
Well, that's very exciting as well. So all that sort of gears towards AI and things like that I think is another focus of P33, the DPI, and how might that impact the AEC industry, the evolution of AI?
So it is, and Joe, you'll have lots of ideas on this as well. So this is many of these questions you're better positioned than I am. But what I'll say is that there are a couple things that we know. The first is we know that the building industry in general has been in the construction industry has been one of the slower industries to adopt this type of technology. But what we also know is that use cases exist. And I'll take a very simple one that I've had a lot of conversations about. I'd encourage you all to get to know the new head of the Discovery Partners Institute at DPI. His name is Bill Jackson. And Bill is actually the second most senior person at Johnson Controls. If you know Johnson Controls, they're essentially in the control system for building business. And that's, if you just think about that, you think about it as something as basic as, how do I manage HVAC systems? How do I manage light systems? How do I monitor security? All of those things. Imagine a world where it's done with, when it breaks, we go fix it. We have a security guard stand out there all the time to monitor it. There's no preventative maintenance. There's no way to learn, etc. You start adding sensors and AI to that. You start doing predictive maintenance, so you fix something before it breaks, before a building goes down. You use drones and smart technology from drones to start to perceive issues with roof, or use thermal cameras to see where there's leakage causing more consumption of heat, etc. Start to imagine all the value you can unlock. We're in inning number 2 of that phenomenon. Imagine if all the folks on the phone here today passionate about this subject matter were to work more closely with the leading AI scientists at UChicago and DPI and Urbana-Champaign to solve these problems. We're on the cusp of something. It hasn't been done yet to the extent it should, but I think it's something we can do.
Yeah, I definitely know that there are a number of people in our industry looking at AI to innovate. And of course we know that the AEC, as you mentioned, needs innovation. It is one of the least productive industries of all of them out there over the last 4 decades. And so this is a great opportunity for Chicago to continue its leadership as it began over a century ago, with leadership in architecture and engineering throughout the 30s, as you mentioned, 33, and then through the new modernism with engineers like Fazl Khan that you mentioned.
And the thing for me, Joe, that I think is just a cultural observation we picked up in our research. And this is a bit of an urging to all of us on the call today. What we learned is that Chicago is actually one of the most civically connected cities in the country, which you would think mean that our architects would be working with our computer scientists and our material scientists, and our construction leaders would be working more with our structural engineering and innovators, et cetera, than any place in the country. But when we actually do the research, you find that's not the case. We do this really interesting thing in Chicago that I'm proud of. It turns out we all come together to support the opera. We all come together to support the incredible Architecture Foundation. But we don't always say, let me help you with your hardest business problem when we have people from very different backgrounds. And so I think the thing that I hope, for example, DPI inspires, the thing that we're trying to inspire, is that all of you start to think about our startups as sources of great ideas, and that you can get those when we're allowed to have cups of coffee again. You can get those in a cup of coffee with a colleague who is in a very different industry on a regular basis. And I just think we're missing those little collisions between people who attack the same problem from different perspectives. And I think in an area like architecture and construction, that is an untapped opportunity. And anything I can ever do to help any of you connect to the scientists and innovators thinking about it more from the digital angle, you got it. I will show up and help in any way I can, because I believe in what you all are good at.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that offer of help. And and just because I was able to meet you over the last few months is certainly opened my mind up to what's going on that was outside of our field. So thank you. I guess just to wrap things up before we take questions from the attendees, is, work from home, as you mentioned earlier, has been a big change for all of us. I participated in a conference, technical conference recently talking about innovation, and one of the speakers said that this work from home that we're all experiencing right now is just the tip of the iceberg, and that what the big question she put to all of us is, what is your firm's Uber moment? And you could almost say it was, what is our industry's Uber moment? it may revolve around AI and some other things, but what are your thoughts about those kind of challenges?
Yeah, it's such a good question, right? I mean, I think there is, have learned never to have any confidence in any of my predictions for the future. So everything I say here will
not come true.
Yeah, if you're looking for tickets, numbers for your lottery ticket, do not ask me. But I guess what I'd say Joe, you and I have a common friend by the name Martin Reeves, who is one of the leading strategists. He's a senior partner at BCG, and he leads their think tank. And Martin definitely encourages a certain way of thinking around scenario planning, and understanding that we all come to think about problems with a certain box. And we have to. Everybody needs a mental model. And that one of the most important things we could probably do right now as leaders in our fields is to put the assumptions in our mental model on the table and essentially ask, what if the opposite were true? What would I do if that weren't the case, right? What would I do? Just the fascinating, I did this with Martin, with my clients when I was at BCG. One of the examples we did to warm everybody up was, okay, what is the probability that airline travel will go to zero? And everybody said 0%. So like, how would that be possible? And then you start to say, well, okay, like, let's start to list your assumptions and do the opposite of those. And we found it. It turns out we're in a scenario right now that 4 years ago, none of my clients would thought was even possible, right? We are, if you've seen the data on airline travel, it's down 95%. And so I would just encourage us all to say, okay, if you're in commercial real estate, if you're in higher education, architecture design, what are the mental model assumptions you make about your business? What is the opposite of that? And then what would you do about it? One of my favorite examples is if you keep sticking with the airline industry a little bit, if you actually understand Southwest's business model, they did this really crazy thing. They just wrote down everything United Airlines did, and they did the opposite of it. So hub and spoke, they went point to point. Different airplane sizes for different routes. They have one airplane. Everybody has a specialized job at Southwest. No, the flight attendant is doing 10 jobs. And so in Southwest has its challenges now, but if you'd said 15, 20 years ago, would Southwest Airlines take on its much bigger, more established rivals, you would have said no, and they did the opposite. So I guess my big question for you all would be, what are your assumptions? What's the opposite? And what would you do about it if you had to, without knowing the answer?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And yes, Martin Reeves is somebody that we've certainly, as a company, have taken advice from and look as a great seer of the future of business. In the last few minutes we have left, you mentioned higher education. What does all this mean for the future of higher education? Because honestly, not just for the fields you mentioned, but we in our industry desperately need diversity, the incoming crowd of the next generation of Fosler Khans. We don't want to lose those guys and girls. So what does all this mean for higher education?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very pivotal 18 months for higher education. It's one of the most important sectors for us to think about, and calling it a sector, it's also a source of beauty and knowledge. So I always have to be careful when I use 20 years of management consulting words to describe some of our most amazing institutions in the world. But I'll make a couple of brief comments. The first is we often talk about digital learning as a disruptor to traditional higher education. I do think it's important to separate those two. So if you think about a lot of what digital learning's unlock is for adult learners. Right? It's actually been proven to be fairly ineffective as a replacement for four-year residential college, for teaching kids, as an example. But I've taken my own online courses. I don't know if any of you have, but when you're old and you've got kids and you've got a busy life and a job, it's actually really helpful to be able to go at your own pace online, et cetera. So digital learning has just unlocked an entirely different audience that four universities just can't serve. And so I don't think it's an either or there. But if I focus on just the traditional higher ed and what we know as UChicago and Urbana-Champaign, et cetera, I think it's really easy to overlook how important the residential part of what they do is. And COVID really put strain on that. So the notion of just small collisions, interpersonal trusted collisions that drive collaboration and new ideas, it is probably Chicago's greatest asset. University of Chicago can't move to Texas. You know, ITW can. And if we were to ever lose as a society this notion of, you know, places where smart people, hungry, come together and learn, and where architecture plays such a critical role too. I mean, I went undergrad at University of Chicago and graduate school to Oxford. I grew up in a small town where the tallest building was, you know, 2 stories high and there were no spires. And I was inspired, right? It made me a different person. I was inspired by the physical plant, by the beauty of the places. And I do think some of that's at risk. I think there are going to be people sort of pushing to say, well, why would we ever go back? You know, why do we need all of this overhead and waste and et cetera? And I think that would be a real tragedy. I think we would not be able to pick up the hidden loss of innovation that occurs. And I think we lose one of our greatest sources of beauty in a society that's probably a bit too focused on efficiency.
Well, that's a good way to finish up our chat. Brad, thank you. And I think we're ready for some questions, but I think Pat might have them. Pat, do you have some questions?
I do have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. I have a question from Kim Dadell, who is with HOK and is also the president of the National Organization of Minority Architects and a good friend of the CAC. And her question to Brad is, how is P33 connecting with minority communities in Chicago?
Yeah, it is such a good question. And so to us, diversity and including groups that are historically left out of these conversations is probably sits before our core business strategy in the way that we think about things. I think we just, as a team, have a mindset that there's such a common way of solving a problem where you get to the diversity part of what you do last. And so for us at P33, it's been a core part of what we do. The first is, I'd say, our team, right? So our team is over 50% people of color and over 50% women. And so if you just think about from an executive team conversation, our ability to make sure before we decide what we're going to go do, the right voices are in the room as we conceive of it was critical to the team that we built. But on all of the work that we do, as you think about designing digital workforce access, if you think about how do I get more women and PhD students of color into our leading science PhD programs, every one of the programs that we build has 2 things that are foundational to what we do. The first is, as we build that program, we actually talk to a diverse set of audiences. So you don't have Brad's version of what a kid in Lawndale needs to have a chance at going to UIC and then getting a job at Google. I don't know. I didn't live there. I didn't grow up that way. And it's, you know, in many ways not my right to define how that should work. And so as we design things, talking to the people who are affected and bringing them into the process to design things is core. I think the other thing is just making sure we measure it and we're intentional about it. And so if you saw our metrics dashboard, what you'd see is there is a way on everything we do to hold ourselves accountable for the representation of the folks in the room. I'd say it's hard. We've got a long way to go. There's some really disappointing, sobering, and scary statistics we run into on a regular basis, and we're at the front lines of them. So African-American entrepreneurs in Chicago don't get capital. It's that simple. If you're a person of color in a neighborhood in Chicago, the barriers you have from a workforce perspective to actually end up with a job in technology are massive. So we have 15 years of hard work to do, but we are trying to be very intentional in solving that.
That's really good, thanks. We also have a couple more questions. One is from Katie Lambert, who is with OKW Architects. And her question is, do you forecast greater migration to the suburbs as a result of COVID? And if so, how does that affect P33 efforts?
Yeah, I do think we perceive from so the conversations we're having, and it's a topic we're trying to follow because it matters for where and how we construct our work and what we encourage. And I know that you all on the call here have a lot of opinions and insight on this as well. So I don't presume to have all the answers. But based on what we've learned so far, we do see foresee a trend where families in particular are going to migrate their residences back to the suburbs. And we picked up it on threads. You actually just hear it in casual conversation. I live in River North and I can't do 2 years of this. I'm going to Lincolnshire, or I don't know the suburbs very well. I've lived in downtown Chicago for 25 years. But that's the way we're going to construct our lives because this is too hard. And it's compounded by things like schooling and virtual schooling and what that means for parenting and childcare and just the difficulties of trying to pull that off in the city. So we think that's a very real trend. We see some knock-ons to that. That's going to create really bad issues for transportation, right? You take Metro off the table for a lot of folks, you take the CTA off the table for some people, and then you say, but we're going back to work in that building on Canal Street. I do not want to be on the Dan Ryan or the Kennedy during that. And so I think we foresee some really big challenges around transportation associated with some of the moves. I think what we don't anticipate, this is where it kind of gets to Martin's question earlier. We think what we're picking up is when companies can safely go back to work, maybe because there's a vaccine that we all have, the value of face-to-face work in difficult task work, like high complexity work, is so high. It is really hard. We've all zoomed ourselves to insanity. Zoom sanity is very real for all of us. Productivity is hurt, and leading companies are observing this. You can't build a culture on your computer. And so we do envision 2 years from now, downtown Chicago still being a place where if you really want to collaborate, you need to be. How this all nets out over the next 2 years and how much, if we have great news in June of next year that we all get vaccines, will we just return to normal or not? It's hard to say, but we do envision that people will move out of the city the next couple of years and that it will have some unintended consequences.
Thank you for that. Another question that came from Grant Euler has to do with along the lines of promoting inclusive growth. How can P33 promote job creation and employment opportunities specific to Chicago as a tech and innovation hub? Is there a place for P33 with the city's Invest Southwest initiative?
Yeah,
I'm sure you're familiar with that.
I am. I think it's a great idea. Needless to say, if I could wear a T-shirt, it would say, "Go Lori." Partisanship aside, it's just been inspiring to watch how committed they are to these issues. And so P33, we were a member of the Economy 2030 task force where a lot of this was thought through, right at the table from around Chicago. And we're actually a member of the mayor's economic recovery task force for coronavirus. And so our work and the conversation with neighborhoods and Invest Southwest has been ongoing since we came into office. We have a very specific angle on this. So we can't solve all those issues, but we contribute. There are two things that we think about. The first is Chicago neighborhoods are blessed with a bunch of assets that we don't often think of as assets. The physical infrastructure that exists on the south and west sides of Chicago is incredible. The ability to support industry, we have grid access, we have roads, et cetera. That's billions of dollars of investment that we don't think often enough as assets to build things in neighborhoods. And so one of the big things that we think about is there are trends like e-commerce, changes in the way that food gets made and processed, et cetera, that are forcing companies all over the country to say, where do I put my next distribution center? If I'm making an alternative food, we don't have plants that make protein-based food at the kind of scale that we need. We make lots of traditional food in Chicago. How do we ensure we're the center for distribution and warehousing? How do we make sure that we're the center for alternative food, alternative energy sources, et cetera? And so one of the big things we've been urging is how do we make sure there are lots of jump balls in the country where companies are saying, where do I build my next warehouse? And how do we make sure that those get built in places like Austin or Pullman or Lawndale, and that they're tied to our city colleges, which have great programs in training workers. These are skilled jobs that require, it's technology. Working in a warehouse now is that you're wearing goggles that tell you what to do. There's lots of virtual reality in how you do your work. There's analytics and how to think about optimizing things in the warehouse, et cetera. And so for us, we think about the intersection of neighborhoods and technology as a really big opportunity.
Thank you for that. Some good thinking, some motivation for more thinking on that. Another one that came in, Brad, is the fact that CAC is very dedicated to our teen education programs, and in particular to girls with our Girls Build program. Are you seeing more women getting to tech? And what can be the role of CAC with our teen programs overall, but especially with our Girls Build to encourage interest in tech?
Yeah, I love that program, and we need to work more together on that. So a couple of observations. Let me give you some good news. Chicago actually has the largest percentage of women founders of tech companies in the country. I think it's like 34% of our founders are women. That's an incredible stat. Challenge, they get about 4% of the capital. So, something we need to work on. So in general, I think we've got a shot to really lead on this. But the research P33 has done basically says the kind of programming you're doing is critical and we need to scale it. So the evidence is that by the time we get to the end of college, women are underrepresented in STEM fields. And that engaging them as early as possible to build love for subject and confidence, we're talking middle school, is critical. It's hard to go approach somebody at the age of 20 and say, look how exciting this all-male engineering class is, taught by a male professor. Maybe you should think about this for your career. It's just, that's a big leap. It feels very foreign to people. And so I think your programming is critical. What I'd say is there are two critical things I want to highlight. The first is one other piece of good news that I'd love to get the Architecture Foundation more engaged with. You may have read in the paper that Melinda Gates actually picked Chicago to be her big investment site for getting more women into technology. And she made this decision in January. We actually worked with her team. It's called Pivotal Ventures to make that selection. In all told, it's about $40 million of incremental investment that's going to come to Chicago to support women in tech. And they now have people on the ground who should be working with the Architecture Foundation to weave all this programming together and really build a pipeline for women into these fields. I think the core insight that we have in our work is it can't just be one program or one mentor or one step. It's almost like a conveyor belt that starts in middle school and ends with employment. And if any part of that conveyor belt is ripped or broken, it's really hard to keep moving along that trend into a science field. And so it means we need coordination between your program and CPS. We need coordination between CPS and the bridge programs to college. We need coordination between colleges and college persistence support programs. And we need employers deeply invested in these programs so they're ready to offer people jobs that they don't normally offer jobs to. And so I think this is a take a village approach, and we need your program in that village.
That sounds great, Brad, and we'll look forward to you introducing us to that team. In the meantime, we're getting ready to close, and Lynn, I'll send it back to you at this point.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Joe. Thank you, Brad. It's been a really insightful presentation. And, we've learned a lot, and I hope to include this conversation in years to come. So thank you for all your work. And we're looking forward to getting involved with
Honor.
I think it's a really exciting project. So before we close, I just want to acknowledge one of CAC's best employees and somebody who's been instrumental to the growth and development of the Industry Council, and that's our Val Adams, who you all know. You know, I first got to know Val because he's a docent. He was part of the 2011 class and specializes in giving the river cruise. He always wows our guests with all the stories of the river in our city. In 2016, I personally recruited Val to come work in the development department because I saw how engaging he was, and he's done such a fabulous job with our corporate partners program. And he's really used his love of architecture and also his business development skills to really grow it. And he's been such a keen partner with us, and he's actually grown the program from 36 members in 2017 to more than 90 today. And it's a great mix of friends and family from the architecture and design and engineering, construction and real estate firms. He's got a passion for CAC in relationship building. And I'm saying all this to honor Val because he's decided that he's ready to retire. So he is leaving us in all the fabulous things that he does for the CAC. He's going to still be close as an architecture river cruise, and we hope that we'll be able to call on him much in the future. But Val, thank you for everything that you've done. And we're leaving it in good hands with Patricia Garza, who you saw today, who will be taking the program from here. And so thank you very much, Val, for all that you've done, and let's your terrific work. Thanks. And thanks everybody for being a wonderful member of Industry Council and for joining us today. And please come and see us next week when we open at the CAC. Thank you.